Almost a century ago, one of history's greatest and most enigmatic inventors had a dream: to provide free wireless energy from a mysterious tower and lab on the east end of Long Island called Wardenclyffe. For decades, the remains of his great dream lay abandoned, deteriorating more with each day. It was unknown whether the historic site where the cryptic genius imagined a better world would be lost forever. The great inventor's name was Nikola Tesla.
Tesla is one of those people that he gave us a lot and we gave him pretty much nothing. If you go into a school, and ask most kids who Thomas Edison is or someone like that, they all know who he is. Tesla, nobody has any idea despite his contributions.
Who? Tesla, the one behind me?
Who is Tesla?
I don't know.
I've heard of the name, but I don't remember.
I have no idea.
Tesla, the guy who started the car?
Who is Tesla? I have not a clue. Is he German?
Oh my God, I know this.
Is he a Nobel Prize winner or something?
Astronomer? I'm not sure.
I don't know who Tesla is, I'm sorry.
From the responses of these people, you'd probably never guess that the contributions of Nikola Tesla helped give birth to the modern world, particularly when this location is so close to his once world-famous laboratory.
When you're speaking with people who are educated engineers, they know who Tesla is, but ordinary people don't know. And this is our main aim, and this is the reason why we are doing what we are doing now, to open the eyes to all Americans, to be aware about the significance of this person.
Many people aren't aware that Tesla was a United States citizen. Literally, the Smithsonian Institute in DC told our president that the reason that they did not display Tesla technologies there was because Tesla was not an American citizen. So it puts us in a difficult position to where we, the Tesla Science Foundation, have to educate organizations like the Smithsonian.
We Americans are more Edison-centric, and it takes kind of a leap of faith to understand that Tesla offers a different way of looking at life and energy and science.
He's also sort of known, I think, among inventors as sort of like almost an abstract idea about what science can be. I mean, he had ideas so much bigger and larger than the sort of narrow-casted ideas that drove Edison. Edison was driven by the market, right? He was a great businessman. When he thought up an idea like the phonograph, this was all about like, how can I create this thing and then find a market for it and get it out there and make money? Nothing wrong with that. That's one very classic and fantastic form of American invention. Tesla's this other kind.
Born of Serbian parents in what today is Croatia, Nikola Tesla's first breakthrough was the induction motor, an invention thought impossible by the scientific community at the time. By creating a motor that utilized alternate current as opposed to the costly and inefficient direct current electricity, Tesla revolutionized industry forever. The inspiration came to him while strolling with a friend as he recited one of his favorite literary works, Goethe's Faust. In a remarkable feat, along with the induction motor, Tesla patented the whole polyphase system, which made alternate current a practical means for long-range power transmission. It was now possible for electricity to be accessible to the average American. Teaming up with George Westinghouse, Tesla set out to electrify the US. But Thomas Edison, heavily invested in the inferior direct current, wouldn't surrender his hopes to the new technology. The costly battle, which would become known as the War of the Currents, would practically bankrupt Westinghouse. Unable to secure new investments due to his royalty contract with Tesla, Westinghouse saw Edison and his direct current method poised for victory. Tesla viewed this as a giant leap backwards for mankind's progress. Instead of being concerned with his own financial gain, Tesla tore up his contract so Westinghouse could continue to implement the polyphase system. Tesla's sacrifice ultimately led to affordable electricity for the masses. The high cost of direct current would have made that impossible should Edison have triumphed. The royalty contract Tesla had with Westinghouse would have made him a billionaire at the time. Instead, the humanitarian inventor would die almost penniless in the Hotel New Yorker.
He was brilliant, and he worked very hard in his career, and he suffered in the end of his career.
I'm very fortunate to be now almost the only person living who has actually met Nikola Tesla. I was about 9 years old. My mother had family matters to talk over with Tesla, so we went to the hotel. We went up to his suite of rooms. In the Serbian way, he hugged me and kissed me 3 times, and then put his hand through my hair, tousled my hair a little bit. Tesla was known as having so many idiosyncrasies. He didn't like to shake hands necessarily because of fear of germs. And I look back on that thing as if he was afraid of germs, what was he doing ruffling this 9-year-old kid's hair?
All of those aspects of Tesla were just, the function of his, great mind at work. But that's also what gave him sort of like this magic pull, and I think a lot of us who love that kind of character.
Following his victory in the War of the Currents, Tesla would continue to innovate.
Tesla is the only independent inventor who is responsible for 2 fundamental technologies. That is alternating current and all of the elements that go with alternating current, and radio and all the elements that go with radio.
Nikola Tesla discovered terrestrial waves.
Fluorescent lights, induction motor, remote control, robotics, wireless communication.
X-rays, a little before Rankin.
We just recognized Tesla with like 70 different patents, but just from Tesla coil, if you're looking about medical equipment, what come out, it's unbelievable. And also, we know Tesla is father of green energy.
Tesla certainly had an impact on what we do in my field. This key moment in the development of nuclear physics, where there was a need to go to the next step, it was there because Tesla was working on high voltages. We did that because the technology allowed it, and the technology is something that Tesla gave us. That's a big impact. It's a very big impact.
But despite his long list of contributions to science, it was wireless energy that interested him most. Through transmission of power without wires, Tesla believed he could best help advance the human race. All of his previous work and patents were leading up to this grand vision. He would ultimately set out to achieve this dream at Wardenclyffe.
He was a visionary about things which largely turned out to be true, and which are probably key things today, like clean, sustainable energy. That's obviously is super important.
To Tesla, Wardenclyffe was to be the hope of humanity, where a brighter future could be imagined and implemented. He envisioned a world connected by technology where even inhabitants in the most remote places on Earth would be able to access communications and power to improve their lives. He would create a lab. He would create a tower, and together both would create a new world. But before Tesla could actualize his theories, he would need to test them on a grander scale than could be achieved from his small laboratory on New York's Houston Street.
Tesla's work at Wardenclyffe really began at Colorado Springs.
In preparation to build at Wardenclyffe, Tesla had 3 main objectives to accomplish: to develop a transmitter of great power, to perfect a means for individualizing the energy transmitted, and to ascertain the laws of propagation of currents through the Earth and atmosphere.
Tesla was working with huge electrical energies, creating giant electrical bolts, and fires were a problem, so he had to get out of New York City, and he moved to Colorado Springs. Once he was in Colorado, out in a protected area, he could have these 30, 50-foot lightning bolts.
Near this site, the iconic experimental laboratory of Nikola Tesla was built. Today, a marker commemorates the area. Though the modest historic plaque is easy to miss, Tesla had arrived here with much excitement and fanfare. But Tesla's endeavour with wireless energy transmission was not without its critics.
The times are not ripe for the acceptance of the views implied by the inventor. More than that, other ideas suggested and patented by him bear to a marked extent the imprint of daydreaming and unhealthful pandering. His once great name has suffered possible irreparable injury. Still, the engineering world owes much to his fertile brain, and its seeming degeneration can only excite pity and regret.
To imagine something that was way outside the bounds of the possibilities of that time, and then try to actually figure out the mechanics of how that would work. I mean, we're still 100 years later trying to figure out how to do wireless electrical transmission. I mean, he almost made us think of science as kind of wizardry and magic. But he tied that to the very practical thing of like, once we've identified these magical forces in nature, let's figure out a way to, throw a bridle around them, harness them, and allow it to push us forward.
The secret experiments in Colorado Springs were punctuated by foreboding signs warning the curious to keep a cautious distance. Visitors were greeted by a verse from Dante's Inferno, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." Fearful of competitors and industrial espionage, Tesla kept his team small, working with assistants Fritz Lowenstein and later Coleman Cheeto.
He built a barn-like structure with what could be described as a monopole capped off with a smaller sphere.
The strange laboratory structure had a retractable roof, a feature Tesla installed to prevent it from catching fire through the operation of his sparking coils. The sphere, 30 inches in diameter and mast, acted as an elevated terminal, which is an electrical conducting body insulated in space. Its main function was to accumulate an electrical charge. By raising the height of the sphere, Tesla learned he could control the frequency of the coil. An evolution of this design would later be implemented at Wardenclyffe.
He put a magnifying transmitter, a sophisticated form of Tesla coil, inside this structure.
Tesla considered his magnifying transmitter one of his most important inventions. The specially designed Tesla coil was a high-power harmonic oscillator that could generate very high voltages. This air-core multiple resonant transformer would be the key element of Tesla's wireless energy system.
That image of him sitting in that giant room with the blast of electricity blowing over his head, that very famous picture, that's Nikola Tesla, right? He's the inspiration for so many young scientists who want to go out there and sort of bust through the boundaries of what's known and what's possible.
Part of the reason Tesla chose Colorado Springs was the ability to observe lightning storms over the Great Plains. He even created some of his own.
When he created artificial lightning, artificial lightning, okay? Edison, he's not creating artificial lightning, he's creating the phonograph and the light bulb and these very practical things, right? But the other side of that is Tesla in Colorado, creating artificial lightning that was so powerful that the thunder of it was heard miles away and apparently charged the ground such that when people were walking, right, these electrical snaps would occur every time they lifted their feet.
From the copper-plated sphere atop the antenna, giant electrical discharges streamed out. The man-made bolts reportedly exceeded 100 feet in length. Strange effects were also observed, like the flight patterns of butterflies, which seemed to be caught in a swirling vortex.
Apparently the butterflies had become so charged that they flew around within the glow of like a St. Elmo's fire. I mean, this is the kind of thing that gave Tesla his reputation. This was a man who was sort of harnessing the magic of nature, almost scarily so, but providing the sense of like such inspiration and motivation for others to think like, God, I gotta get into that field. I want to be one of those guys.
One night, as electrical energy streamed from the antenna sphere, the town of Colorado Springs was suddenly plunged into darkness. Tesla had shorted out the dynamo at the El Paso power station. He was denied additional power until he'd fixed the plant personally. The setback was temporary. In one experiment, Tesla was able to light 3 incandescent bulbs planted in the earth without the use of wires. The mysterious inventor, however, was no stranger to controversy. During his stay in Colorado Springs, Tesla made an extraordinary claim.
Brethren, we have a message from another world, unknown and remote. It reads, 1, 2, 3.
While monitoring the electrical energy of the Earth, Tesla had picked up a signal consisting of a regular repetition of numbers, the characteristics of which Tesla surmised precluded them from being of terrestrial origin. His critics had a field day.
If there are people in Mars, they certainly showed most excellent taste in choosing Colorado Springs as the particular point on the Earth's surface with which to open communications. I have talked with no scientific men who do not consider Tesla's claim absurd.
It's one of the things about Tesla that I think for the last 100 years has made it easy to marginalize him and set him aside as kind of like not a serious scientist. But nowadays I think we would understand that all of those aspects of Tesla were just the function of his great mind at work. We now live in a time when we see that and realize that may not mean that he's, bewitched or strange or, mentally challenged. It may mean that he's a genius.
Another outspoken critic was Guglielmo Marconi, who disparaged the idea in several publications. 20 years later, though, Marconi would make the same claim. Though the signals didn't originate from alien civilizations, Tesla may have indeed picked up transmissions from space. Tesla's finely tuned transmitters at the time could easily have received the radio frequencies emitted from stars, a discovery that would not happen for another 30 years by physicist Karl Jansky. Decades earlier, it may actually have been Tesla who built the first radio telescope. Another strange phenomenon present in Colorado Springs was the creation of ball lightning. These luminous spheres of electric energy, though rare in nature, Tesla had created in his lab, at first by accident as a byproduct of his experiments. He later claimed to be able to create them at will, though they quickly became a nuisance. These charged fireballs had a violent impact on some of Tesla's equipment, once shattering the mast poles and destroying other lab apparatus. But it was nature's real lightning that created a breakthrough for Tesla. While using a wireless receiver to view electrical effects associated with lightning storms, Tesla discovered the existence of terrestrial stationary waves. This discovery strengthened his belief that the Earth itself could be used as a conductor of energy. Tesla theorized that, like a tuning fork, the Earth could be responsive to electrical vibrations attuned to the same frequency. These two separate tuning forks are attuned to the same frequency. The first represents the transmission method, the second the Earth. By striking one, the resonance causes the other to vibrate. Another way to illustrate this transfer of energy is using a small ball. By using these principles, the hypothesis suggested that Tesla could be able to transmit wireless energy to any place on Earth with virtually no loss once the Earth was resonated. Resonating the Earth, however, would require an upfront investment of approximately 75 kilowatts of power.
He actually was demonstrating wireless transmission on a smaller scale, I guess you could say, than globally, but with large apparatus that he had set up there, and I created a miniature version of that. The idea was just to demonstrate the basic principle. Close in, you can actually transmit a small amount of power. It's really not practical, but it does demonstrate the principle. The energy flows through the ground by true electrical conduction. As a result, electrical energy is present that comes from the transmitter. I was lighting a small incandescent lamp.
To further demonstrate the wireless system, Peterson connected a toy car to the receiver. Once the transmitter and receiver were tuned to the same frequency, the car accelerated.
Actually showing the wireless transmission of electrical energy is actually a small-scale replica of the basic wireless transmission reception apparatus that Tesla designed. Colorado Springs, Tesla was really exploring unplowed ground. He was pioneering really the construction of the apparatus that would be used at Wardenclyffe.
Colorado Springs basically was a huge stepping stone for Tesla. And once he had all of that knowledge, he then moved back to New York and formed his partnership with Morgan.
Now he was prepared to build.
Morgan was the richest, most powerful man in the world at the time. There are cartoons where you see Morgan as the king. Morgan controlled the banks, he controlled shipping, he controlled mining, he controlled everything.
I think J.P. Morgan was very much intrigued with Tesla. He had seen what Tesla had accomplished in alternating current.
So Tesla was invited to Morgan's house right after Thanksgiving. So after dinner, he met with Morgan and he explained to Morgan that he has a way to transmit messages around the world, and in particular, transmit messages from here to England.
He had as an idea that Tesla would be able to receive radio communications from Europe, perhaps so he could get the London stock market closing before anybody else, and he could act on that. So J.P. Morgan had a particular interest in that.
So they set out to form a partnership. Morgan says, I want to know exactly what you can do. And Tesla said, well, for $250,000, I can send messages to the Pacific Ocean all the way to Japan and China. And for $100,000, I can send it to Europe. And so Morgan says, let's just do one ocean at a time. I'll give you $150,000. Can you set up a wireless system from here to England? And Tesla agrees. Now, what Tesla didn't realize was that Morgan also attached the patents to the agreement. Tesla was just thinking they had a business relationship, but Morgan also wanted 50% of the patents, and he also attached the lighting patents. But he's writing a check for $150,000. So Tesla was kind of stuck. What should I do? So he agrees, and he says to Morgan, you take 51%, I'll only take 49%. I trust you. You're a great philanthropist. You're a great man. Let's do this thing. And so Morgan says, sure, I'll take the 51%. He was ready to do 50-50. And so they formed a deal. It wasn't just as a business deal. He saw it as a mechanism to help humanity move to the next level. Wardenclyffe, he understood, would change the very nature of how we deal with the world.
With Morgan's backing, Tesla looked within his social strata for the talent to execute the design plans for Wardenclyffe.
Nikola Tesla was a very popular person in Manhattan. He was a sort of an icon. Society people flocked to him because of his experiments.
Tesla lived in the Waldorf Astoria at the height of the Gilded Age. Tesla's friends included John Jacob Astor, who owned the Waldorf Astoria, Rudyard Kipling, Mark Twain. He knew Teddy Roosevelt.
Another esteemed member of Tesla's circle was renowned architect Stanford White, a partner in the firm McKim, Mead & White.
Stanford White is one of my favorite guys. He designed Madison Square Garden. Madison Square Garden, at the time, was the tallest building in New York City. He designed Rosecliff, Newport, Tennis Hall of Fame, and many other buildings.
I'm related to Stanford White. Stanford White was my great-grandfather. There are a lot of things that you see walking in New York around Washington Square. You see the arch, and then you see the Italianate cathedral. Not only did he like to design the buildings and so on, but he liked to design the parties. On some of those occasions, he called in Tesla to design the lighting. So it was sort of full service kind of thing.
Stanford White was certainly one of the most prominent architects, And I think that just as a favor to Tesla, that he arranged to build the laboratory that would be next to the Wardenclyffe Tower.
He needed the greatest architect, he needed the greatest financier. This was an incredible triumvirate, and that was the triumvirate that Tesla was going to use to revolutionize the world. White had land out in St. James, and right near there, Mr. Warden had a potato farm. And so he introduced Mr. Warden to Tesla and named the place after Mr. Warden, called it Wardenclyffe. It was 60 miles out. It took about an hour and a half by a train to go out, and he would go almost daily. Long Island was the most east you could be, near New York City and closest to Europe. So it was a smart place to put any wireless system. Marconi put a system there, Telefunken, the German concern, put a system there, and Tesla had a system there. It was logical to place it there. Tesla was working with Stanford White, arguably the greatest architect of the day. They were planning on a radio city. Warden had 2,000 acres. Tesla just took 200 with the thought that he would get the other 1,800 once this thing got going. He was going to put housing in there, he was going to import engineers and really create a wireless center. He was envisioning what basically became the major networks and the radio stations and the news stations, because he wanted to flash the news all over the world. So he was envisioning an entire radio city, moving it all out to what becomes now Shoreham, Long Island.
Tesla was a creature of habit. While in Shoreham, lunch for the inventor would often arrive by train in a basket from the chefs of the Waldorf Astoria.
Tesla, of course, had marvelous dreams of what he could do. He had the belief that with his knowledge that he had acquired through previous experiments, that he would be able to transport energy from Wardenclyffe to Europe directly, without wires. This was something entirely new. It was a dream based in reality.
I think Tesla built Wardenclyffe for a lot of reasons. He wanted to distribute light, voice, pictures, and power by means of wireless. He understood that this would advance humanity in a tremendous way and bring about, in a sense, world peace, because it would bring all the peoples of the earth together.
In 1901, Tesla began construction on his World Wireless System laboratory.
The building was a classic design that Stanford proposed for it. He was a big admirer of Tesla. They were good friends, and I think he did it for very little money. $900, even in those days, wasn't very much money for designing a building like that.
The Wardenclyffe building was a 94 by 94 foot structure.
It had beautiful Palladian windows. It had a brick facade.
It's a very useful building.
Bare exposed steel beams which span an enormous parlor.
The swirled globe on the top of that structure, on top of the roof. I love those touches.
This was an amazing place, and he had many people working there with the idea that they would be transmitting electricity around the world.
It was meant to be a functional lab space.
The lab was divided into 4 main sections. Sliding doors led into the main entrance at the plant's north side. Extending the full length of the building was a workshop, complete with a variety of wood and metalworking and glass-blowing machinery. A staircase led to a balcony area to view the operations. The south side, which was opposite the tower base, was the laboratory area. Here, electrical equipment critical to the plant's operation was stationed. Set up as a gallery of sorts, Tesla also had some of his inventions on display, like his remote-controlled boat. From this room, visitors would be able to see Tesla's past achievements and look through the window to view his future one. The east side contained the boiler room and had easy access to fuel deliveries.
There was a spur from the Long Island Railroad which came down alongside of the building where coal cars could be driven in to provide fuel for the boilers.
Opposite the boiler space was the dynamo room. This was where the power that would give life to Wardenclyffe Tower was to begin. The 200 kilowatt generator, as well as some smaller dynamos, were leased from the Westinghouse Corporation. When not working on the laboratory, Tesla and Stanford White often spent time together in the peaceful scenery of East Long Island.
The relation wasn't a simply business relation. Stanford White often invited Tesla to this house here. He was out on the weekends. Stanford White's wife would go out in the garden and find Tesla roaming around in the middle of the night through the gardens and ask him what's he doing, why wasn't he asleep? Tesla said he never slept.
They were great friends. White often came to the laboratory.
I think they were just good company. They were both very interested in what the other one was thinking about.
There were, however, impending waves of change on the horizon which threatened the idyllic serenity of the future Radio City.
Morgan leaves for Europe, and when Morgan leaves for Europe, a stock market crash is created, and it's all because of Morgan, and Tesla's prices now go up. But at the same time, Marconi is doing wireless communication as well.
Many people were competing in those days. They were making advances in technologies for radio transmission, for X-rays, for transmission over wires.
Marconi proceeds without Tesla's patents. Marconi is pirating Tesla's apparatus. So while Morgan is away in Europe, Tesla is reading the electrical journals. And in the electrical journals, there's an article written by Marconi.
As the title of my paper implies, it is my intention first to describe full the efforts which I have made in order to tune or syntonize the wireless system. I first constructed an arrangement which consists of a Leyden jar or condenser circuit in which is included the primary of what may be called a Tesla coil, the secondary of which is connected to the Earth aerial conductor. The idea of using a Tesla coil to produce the oscillations is not new.
When Tesla finds out that Marconi is pirating his apparatus, he decides to change the nature of their agreement. They agreed on a 90-foot tower, but Tesla instead doubles the size of the tower, and his reasoning was simple. He said, by simply doubling the size, I can cover the entire Earth, so the revenues will be geometrically much larger amounts. And that's the reason why he doubles the size, but his costs will increase dramatically as well.
With others exploiting his patents, Tesla set out to make his competition obsolete. By modifying the tower plans, he would vastly increase the range of his plant.
Once Tesla had increased the size of the tower, White was trying to figure out how to save him money.
Tesla wanted to make a very big tower.
He was looking out for Tesla, trying to control his costs, because Tesla initially wanted a 600-foot tower.
There was a big back and forth between the two of them. Tesla's big grand ideas and Stanford White saying, somehow you're going to have to pay for this. So I think it was a kind of a steadying influence. Stanford White tried to come up with something that, they could really realize. The lab had a purpose, which was to transmit energy around the globe. That had a very precise mathematical constraint. The wavelength would have demanded a certain height for the tower. Not an exact height, because you can work in harmonics, and so that's what happened over time. The big original tower that Tesla had in mind became a smaller tower, but by precise multiples.
The length of the tower was in mathematical relationship to the speed of light and the size of the Earth. These were not random numbers. He had calculated these kinds of things to use the Earth as a carrier wave, and so the tower had to be in some type of resonant frequency with the Earth.
But what method did Tesla plan to employ in distributing his wireless energy?
Tesla had two methods in mind, both using the same apparatus. One would involve electrical current flowing through the Earth with a return path through the upper atmosphere. The other method, it would be what Tesla called an Earth resonance system, a single wire transmission line where the Earth itself would become part of the circuit and would be resonating like a bell rings when you strike it with a clapper.
Tesla was using the Earth's natural resonant frequency, and he wanted to grip into that and send a pulse into that. And so once he sent a charge, the charge would come back up and then be stored at the top of the cupola. And he would transform the energy and magnify it by changing its frequency, and then jumping it by using the Earth as a resonant frequency to the receiving tower. And then he would want to have similar towers at nodal points around the planet. He had calculated where to put these towers. They were not randomly designed, so you could jump energy.
He developed what he called a universal relay. It would have, in a way, bridged the gap between other transmitters. For instance, Niagara Falls.
Tesla planned on following up the Wardenclyffe plant with a second one in Scotland near Glasgow. Like Wardenclyffe, it would function as a magnifying transmitter. The scope of Tesla's plan was breathtaking. Like his polyphase system, he had calculated all the components necessary for his sophisticated wireless transmission plan. He was on the cusp of another technological revolution. But first, he would receive a message from Marconi in the form of 3 rudimentary taps.
In December, Marconi sends 3 pulses from Europe to Canada, and he sends the first transatlantic message, and he becomes world famous overnight. He had such fame, people then thought Marconi must know what he was doing, and the irony is that Marconi really didn't have an advanced system at all.
Marconi has sent some really primitive type of signal from London, and this idea of getting the stock market returns early it no longer was so important to Tesla. Tesla, of course, had his own ideas of what should be done, and his ideas were not like radio. They were maybe 1,000 times more complicated than radio. And J.P. Morgan wasn't interested in doing something 1,000 times better than what he needed. He was only interested in having it done.
Pouring salt in the wound, Marconi had used 17 of Tesla's patents for his achievement. To preserve his patent rights, Tesla thought big, putting his efforts into implementing a practical world wireless system that would be years ahead of competing technology. By February of 1902, the foundation of the tower had been laid. The octagonal base was made of concrete and slabs of a hard type of stone called gneiss. It had 8 sides approximately 38.5 feet each. By September of the same year, the tower ascended into the sky. Built by W.D. Crowe, it dominated the vertical landscape. At 187 feet, the height was calculated for optimal performance of the magnifying transmitter.
The Wardenclyffe Tower itself was made out of heavy wood timbers with a large mushroom-shaped cupola at the top. The cupola itself was made of steel.
Constructed by the American Bridge Company, the cupola contained 48 trusses of angled metal circled round the perimeter to create the tower's dome. Prior to receiving its casing, part of the metal framework was ultimately to be painted with 1 coat of red paint.
That wasn't the final design. He wanted a covering of the design, and that's part of the money he needed from Morgan to complete the tower. Partly it was for protection, so that the electrical charge would be more contained.
Finished tower was to be encased by a building facade with storage cells installed onto the exterior of the cupola dome. With so much wood and metal required for the massive project, Tesla's private railroad spur became vital.
It was made out of mostly timber, but there's 50 or 100 tons of steel in here as well, and 50,000 bolts.
As the tower rose into the air, the metal connection plates suddenly stopped. Metal was strictly forbidden beyond level K, presumably to avoid interaction with the electrical apparatus. Instead, wooden pegs were used.
One of the amazing things about the construction, if one of the timbers broke, you could remove the timber and put it in, so it was doubly reinforced. A tremendous amount of intelligence went into the design of this incredible structure.
Learning from his work at Colorado Springs, Tesla improved the geometry of his magnifying transmitter design. The elevated terminal's slender mast and small sphere evolved into the shape and proportions of the Wardenclyffe cupola. Tesla had the progress at the laboratory documented by photographer Dickinson V. Alley, who shot the iconic Colorado Springs double exposure photographs. Alley captured the only known image of Nikola Tesla at Wardenclyffe, albeit probably by accident. But perhaps to better photograph his elusive subject, Alley should have headed underground.
There was an amazing article in the Long Island newspapers which said that Tesla spent more time down in the depths of the tower than he did upstairs. Tesla's tower is 187 feet tall, but it goes down into the ground 120 feet. That's over 10 stories deep into the ground.
In order to tie that tower to the earth itself, they needed a shaft, and the shaft had to be really quite deep until it reached some solid point in the earth. This was part of Tesla's grand idea of sending power without wires.
He had what he called terrestrial grippers, earth grippers, and he would send out these iron poles 300 feet going all the way down to the bottom.
The intention was to get a good grip of the earth, in his words, so the whole earth could be made to vibrate electrically. Tesla describes 300 feet below the bottom of the 120-foot shaft. So the total depth of the ground terminal, we believe, would have been approximately 420 feet.
The mysterious entrance to the 420-foot descent was covered by a small wooden shack at the tower base. But were there more hidden secrets beneath Wardenclyffe?
There were also descriptions of a series of tunnels that were below the tower, starting from the bottom of the 120-foot shaft and curving up to the surface in 4 directions. There was possibly a metallic conductor supported inside of these tunnels. However, most of this is really speculation at this time.
Today, there are no visible signs of Tesla's secret tunnels. Though part of the secret had been broken at a foreclosure hearing in 1922 by the enigmatic inventor himself, whose testimony has provided the best descriptions of the subterranean passages.
The underground portion of the tower, which are these tunnels and grounding terminals, were the most expensive part of the construction.
All of the, what you might call electrical plumbing that went with the tower, including the very deep position below the tower, were built exactly to his specifications.
So, what was the purpose of these puzzling underground passages?
The tunnels would have served as a means of drying out the soil in the area around the base of the tower.
But in addition to draining the moisture from the soil, there may have been another purpose for the tunnels.
He was right above the aquifer.
There may have been acoustic properties associated with these tunnels. This may relate to the conducting properties of the Earth being associated with free electrons that can actually be modeled as a gas. And so there may be something to the speculation that there is an acoustic property or aspect to the operation of the Wardenclyffe Tower.
But as Tesla dug deep to complete his grand vision, it was a mountain of debt that threatened to bury him.
Now he's got financial problems. He's got to go back to Morgan to ask for more money because he's double the size of the tower, but costs have increased because of the stock market crash. Once Morgan finds out Tesla is double the size of the tower, Tesla's breached his contract, and Morgan feels he doesn't owe him anything else. Tesla was kind of stuck. He had formed a partnership with a very powerful man, the most powerful man in the world, so he couldn't oppose Morgan. Tesla was appealing to Morgan. Can't you get beyond my simple decision to change the plans? We're talking about changing the world, bringing wireless communication to the entire planet. Tesla told Morgan that he could create an unlimited number of wireless channels. Hammond called that patent the prophetic genius patent. What Tesla did was he figured out how to multiply frequencies, what becomes scramblers or high security systems. Marconi did not understand how to create separate channels. Tesla knew how to create an unlimited number of separate channels. Marconi didn't know how to create 2 separate channels. Marconi was using a spark gap apparatus. Tesla was using his Tesla oscillator, which was a continuous wave. So Tesla knew he was years ahead of Marconi before they would catch up to Tesla's technology. And so it's in his nature. He wanted to do the whole thing or do nothing, and he saw it as beneath him to do part of it.
Tesla's hopes went beyond wireless communications. Tesla's dream had always been to transmit wireless power to even the most remote places on Earth. He believed Morgan would eventually see the light, and his dream for the world continue.
So when he was talking to Morgan, he says, I've found the Holy Grail. He's envisioning a mass communication age. With his induction motor, he realized, he calculated how much man-hours of labor he saved per year on the planet. And then instead of someone plowing a field, they could go back to school, and so that we would evolve at faster and faster rates. This is all what the Holy Grail was. He understood that technology would be used to advance the human race. He was an idealist.
However, Morgan was still unswayed by the inventor's mission.
From about 1901 to 1906, as Wardenclyffe is being built, and he's running out of Morgan's money. Once he runs out of the money, where's he going to get the rest of the funds?
He was so close to the completion of the tower that he invested his own money and borrowed money. It was a financial problem for Tesla. It caused him to no longer at that point to ever have the kind of personal money that he could invest in his inventions.
He tries to raise funds from people that he knows, small investors just giving him $3,000 or $5,000. He raises another 50 or 100 on his own. He's got 200 or 250,000 into the project. He goes back to Morgan and says, I've done all this, I put the cupola on top. Help me complete this thing, I need another 100,000.
Dear Mr. Morgan, will you help me on any terms you choose and ensure and develop a great property which will ultimately yield 100-fold returns? Please do not do me an injustice in believing me incapable because a certain sum of money was not sufficient to carry out my undertaking. You may see that my work remains uncompleted by lack of funds, but you will never see that machinery which I construct does not fulfill the purposes for which it was designed. Hearty wishes for the new year, N. Tesla.
But there was no response from Morgan.
Tesla is trying his darndest to keep building the tower. $100,000 to Morgan really was chicken feed. He spent over his lifetime something like $80 million just in artwork. So another $100,000 was really not a lot of money. He simply could not change his mind.
Begging for money was difficult for Tesla, and the flow of money really had slowed up.
Now, completely out of funds, Tesla needed to persuade Morgan to continue construction of the tower. It was time for Tesla to reveal the hidden secret of Wardenclyffe.
Dear Mr. Morgan, I have solved the greatest industrial problem which has confronted humanity since ages. My success is absolutely certain. I can deliver power in any desired amounts to any distance without wire. This will be of incalculable consequences. Will you aid me in this great work?
The news spread quickly.
Bernard Baruch was a very wealthy financier, and he said to Morgan, I see that you're a gambler. And Morgan said, I never gamble. And Baruch said, well, you're gambling with Tesla. He's going to provide free energy for the whole world.
He was interested in distributing electrical energy for general use throughout the world without necessarily any particular charge being made. That's a dream that is difficult to realize in the modern world because whenever there's something good, it has to be charged for.
There is a sense that he was being ambushed by forces he could not control. You know, with the financial world saying, where's the meter? How are we going to make money on this?
On July 14th, 1903, Morgan responded.
Dear sir, I have received your letter, and in reply would say that I should not feel disposed at present to make any further advances. Yours truly, J. Pierpont Morgan.
To concerned residents, it might have seemed like Tesla had taken his rejection out on the night.
Several nights, he fired up the tower. People from Connecticut claimed they saw a corona on the cupola. They'd heard a rumble, and then he sent this pulse up, and people could see this corona, all the different lights above it. He was measuring the size of the Earth. He was sending an impulse, measuring its speed to come back. He was calculating where the nodal points would be, which meant where he would place other towers. He was testing his equipment. He was pushing it to the extreme. He was setting the Earth in resonance.
Dear Mr. Morgan, I have put all the money I could scrape together in this plant. With $50,000 more, it is completed.
Dear sir, in reply to your note, I regret to say that I should not be willing to advance any further amounts of money, as I have already told you. Of course, I wish you every success in your undertaking. Yours very truly, J. Pierpont Morgan.
Dear Mr. Morgan, you wish me success. It is in your hands. How can you wish it? It is just 14 months that the construction work on my plant was stopped. 3 months more with a good force of men, and I would be paying $10,000 a day. Now, I need only a little more to save a great property. Dear Mr. Morgan, are you going to leave me in a hole? I have made 1,000 powerful enemies on your account. There is only one way to go, Mr. Morgan. Give me the money to finish a great work, or else make me a present and let me work out. Dear Mr. Morgan, help me to complete this work, or else remove the obstacles in my path.
Tesla has had a falling out with Morgan for several years. He knows he needs another $75,000 or $100,000 to succeed, and he wants to figure out, how can I turn this one man's mind around? If I can turn one man's mind around, I will succeed with Wardenclyffe. He's trying to tell Morgan, help me form a global community. Help me succeed here, and we will bring all the peoples of the earth together. And unfortunately, it did not dissuade Morgan.
It was in his intention to have his inventions useful for society, and whether that society paid him back in dollars or only in progress was inconsequential to Tesla.
He wanted to bring the world together. In a sense, he was in love with humanity rather than in love with a single individual. He never married, he was celibate.
Morgan's daughter was fascinated with Tesla, and if Tesla were inclined to get married, which he was not inclined to get married, but if he was inclined to get married, he could have become a part of the Morgan family. That would have been something.
As his relationship with J.P. Morgan soured, Tesla persisted to convince him of the value of his investment.
Dear Mr. Morgan, my work is now far advanced and can be finished quickly. I have expended about $250,000 in all, and a much smaller sum separates me from a great triumph. Since a year, Mr. Morgan, there has hardly been a night when my pillow was not bathed in tears. But you must not think me a weak man for that. I am perfectly sure to finish my task, come what may. I remain yours most faithfully, N. Tesla.
Dear Sir, referring to your letter of 13th October, Mr. J.P. Morgan wishes me to inform you that it will be impossible for him to do anything more in the matter. Yours truly, C.W. King.
In addition to construction costs, debts from merely maintaining the facility began to spin out of control. Desperate, Tesla decides to reach out to an old friend for help.
One of the saddest moments is when he goes to George Westinghouse, and he says, Mr. Westinghouse, I need money to resurrect Wardenclyffe. And Westinghouse essentially says, I'm just a titular head. I don't have the money to give you. And it's this incredibly sad moment. At the same time, Westinghouse Company is taking the equipment back because Tesla does owe him $25,000. So you have all these horrible things happening to him. And I think the day that they cart away this $25,000 generator, which basically castrates Wardenclyffe, is the saddest day of Tesla's life. Wardenclyffe really is dead at that point.
It wasn't because of his hubris that led him there. It's because the people he had counted on to help him through hard times abandoned him for their own reasons.
Adding to the immense difficulties, as the tower stood dormant, void of its energizing force, the patents for Tesla's alternate current motor expired. The loss of royalties from these patents at the time Tesla needed them most was a devastating blow. Financial pressures continued to mount. With the world crashing in around him, fortunately, Tesla still had some friends in high places. One helped him avoid eviction from his residence at the Waldorf Astoria. Though he had a place to live, he still couldn't interest Mr. Astor to invest in Wardenclyffe. Astor may have been waiting to see if an earlier investment in Tesla's cold lighting, a forerunner to fluorescent lamps, would pay off.
He was a person who solved the difficulties. He had an idea and he was able to solve these things. And so the persona of Tesla is a person who never gave up, never gave up.
So Tesla says, all right, I'll try to find investors on my own. But Morgan wants his entire 150 back. He wants to continue to keep his 51%. So he's really making it incredibly difficult for Tesla. Now Tesla lives in the Waldorf Astoria, which is the most posh elite place in the world. Another person who lives in the Waldorf is Henry Clay Frick. Frick was worth $60 million just from U.S. Steel, aside from his other wealth. So for Frick to give Tesla $100,000 is not much money. Tesla also was negotiating with Thomas Fortune Ryan, who was also a multimillionaire. Tesla says to Ryan, if I could find 10 men such as yourself to give me $10,000 apiece, I would have the $100,000 I need to complete the tower. And Ryan says, what do you need 10? I can do it. So he finally gets Ryan to meet with Morgan. When Morgan really began to see what was going on here, Morgan really puts a stake in the heart of his business and makes sure that no other multimillionaire will come in. Morgan shifts Ryan into the Equitable Life Insurance Company. Morgan scuttled the deal with a major investor who was willing to give Tesla the money. And that's the dark side of Morgan. And he did it again with Jacob Schiff, and he did it again with Henry Clay Frick. Tesla had all three of these people. Can you imagine these men walking in and seeing a 187-foot tower out on Long Island, seeing Tesla's resume, meeting with Morgan, and the deal not coming through?
JP Morgan at some point just decided no more money for Tesla.
Wireless threatened Morgan's other interests. It threatened his copper mines, it threatened his rubber plantations, and it threatened his lumber yards, which he had in Alaska. So if wireless came in, he would lose all these other operations. Tesla threatened major industries, and Morgan was afraid to look at an entirely different business model of how the revenues would come in if he scrapped the existing system, which basically was running on wires. So once the deal was dead with Morgan, which was in 1906, I say that he had a nervous breakdown and an emotional wreck for that year.
And other tragic news had come to Tesla. Stanford White, friend and architect of Wardenclyffe, was dead. He was murdered by millionaire Harry Thor at the Roof Garden Theatre of Madison Square, a building White had designed. Thor saw White as a romantic rival to his wife, chorus girl Evelyn Nesbit.
So he suffers tremendously in 1906. A very, very sad time for many different reasons. And he became much of a hermit. He pulled away from society. He became bitter for that period.
It is not a dream. It is a simple feat of scientific electrical engineering, only expensive. Blind, faint-hearted, doubting world.
Money had run out in building the tower. His own personal funds that he used to try to complete the project, it constricted what Tesla could do for many of the other ideas that he had. Tesla was a dreamer of great ideas.
He's still trying to figure out how to launch Wardenclyffe. One thing he does in around 1910 and 12, he's trying to negotiate with Henry Ford to sell him a steam engine to replace the gasoline engine, because he figures if I can sell the steam engine, I will then get the money back to do Wardenclyffe. He also had a bladeless turbine, and the turbine, if you reverse it, it also operates as a pump. Remote control devices, radio guidance systems. He also worked with steel companies to figure out how to harness energy from the excess heat and use that to distribute electricity. He kept coming up with different ideas. He invented a speedometer and a tachometer, which he sold to the Waltham Speed Company, and they were put into major automobiles. And he does other inventions as well. He's always trying to get the money to resurrect Wardenclyffe.
He said to my father, I can shovel the money out the window faster than it can come in the door. And that was essentially a part of his life history.
Like any inventor, he was always broke, had just blown the last wad on something, and now is looking for another wad. I mean, the history of him writing these pathetic letters to J.P. Morgan, one of his occasional backers, is kind of depressing, really. He was always either making some money off of a patent and then setting up a lab and it would catch fire, or it wouldn't work out, or, you know, because this is how real inspiration works. He spent his life just chasing after, you know, one funder after another. That's how you did it in 1900.
He just kept going for the next 30 or 40 years. He did not stop creating. He was creative his whole entire life. So I think that there's a tremendously heroic side to him too. They went through this terrible downside, but he did come out of it, and he looked at life in a different way. He felt that his system would eventually succeed. His goal was always to raise the money to go back and resurrect Wardenclyffe.
Half the time, I am like a man condemned to death, and half the time the happiest of mortals. All is still but hope.
Disaster strikes as a great accomplishment of man sinks to the bottom of the ocean. An obvious parallel, but the unthinkable tragedy becomes personal to Tesla. The damage from the mammoth iceberg that brought down the unsinkable ship was not through. The waves were about to rise above the tower that soared too high and leave yet another indelible mark on history.
Because he was living at the Waldorf Astoria and John Jacob Astor owned the Waldorf Astoria, he really stopped paying rent. But once John Jacob Astor passed away, which was in the sinking of the Titanic, Mr. Bolt, who was the manager, wanted the money. And so he owed almost $20,000 in back rent. And he didn't know what to do. So what he did was he eventually transferred the property to Mr. Bolt. Now the property was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars just in terms of its equipment and the tower, etc. But also, if he could have completed it, he thought it would bring in $30,000 a day.
In yet another cruel irony, as a result of the Titanic disaster, Marconi is hailed as a hero. It was two of his operators who were credited with receiving distress signals after the ship's fateful collision. Marconi even received a congratulatory telegram from none other than Thomas Edison. Also sharing the spotlight was Marconi employee David Sarnoff, who would one day become the future head of NBC and RCA. Sarnoff would also go on to create a special complex in Manhattan with the purpose to entertain, elevate, and inspire people all over the world. He called the innovative idea Radio City. After 16 years of struggle, Tesla's doomed tower was out of time.
And even when Wardenclyffe was about to be dynamited, he even appealed to the President of the United States.
But his appeal was futile. On July 4th, 1917, the first dynamite charges were heard in the town of Shoreham. The explosive force dislodged the colossal structure from its base and afterwards sent the cupola crashing to earth. The wounded tower, still standing in fragments, would require several more attempts to finally bring it down. The landscape of Long Island would be forever altered and the potential of the enigmatic genius's World Wireless Center forever untapped.
He dynamited the tower and sold it off for salvage. He got, I think, $1,500, for the lumber and the iron. He had $50,000, $100,000 worth of equipment there, and Bolt just let it all go to scrap, so a lot of this stuff was lost.
I think the incompletion of the Wardenclyffe project was very much emotional for Tesla. He saw, how is it that such a good idea not come to fruition?
You see things like that and you wonder, how can humanity be so short-sighted and so stupid? But we're dealing with ignorance all the time. Schopenhauer said, against stupidity, even the gods themselves struggle in vain.
It's just a terribly tragic moment in his life and in the life of the world. We lose out.
I think without doubt that he felt that he had not only unfinished work, he had an unfinished half of his lifetime. I know this must have bothered him a great deal, in that to create some of these ideas that he had were going to take substantial amounts of money. And unfortunately, Tesla was one of the youngest and of almost the last of the independent inventors. After Tesla came corporate invention.
Over the years, the remnants of a scientist's great hopes became the site for different commercial enterprises. In the late 1930s, the property was leased to Peerless Photo Products Inc., a company that manufactured photographic emulsions. Peerless was acquired by Agfa Corporation, which ceased operations there in 1987. To make matters worse, harmful chemicals like cadmium had been dumped down the tower shaft by the photo paper manufacturers, contaminating the property for decades. 70 years after the tower demolition, the site was abandoned, left alone to quietly decay. During that time, William Turbo founded the Tesla Memorial Society in 1979 to perpetuate the ideals and memory of the great scientist and inventor.
It never was a part of my life to promote Tesla. He was simply my father's uncle. I then said, there is something that I can do to help. If for nothing more complicated than simply making myself available for people who were going to do something for Tesla.
One such group was a small organization from the same area as the Wardenclyffe site.
We had a small science museum in our local high school. The high school had lent us these rooms, but the high school was growing too, and they needed their space back. We had to find a new home. And I had known about Tesla's laboratory, and I also knew at the time that Agfa was no longer using it for its manufacturing purposes. So I thought, well, what better place for a science museum than in a scientist's laboratory? So we incorporated and we became Friends of Science East. We were all contributing to a little bit of seed money so we could begin to promote the idea of creating a science center.
But as the group discovered more about the property and its history, their mission took on a new focus.
Here is a building designed by the preeminent architect of his time, Stanford White. So architecturally, beautiful and interesting and important. It's historically significant. Here's a place where a scientist worked, the last remaining laboratory anywhere in the world where he worked. So why not recognize, acknowledge, and then save this very important place?
Joining efforts with the Wardenclyffe Project, an organization founded by Gary Peterson in 1995, Friends of Science East became the Tesla Science Center at Wardenclyffe.
We visited with politicians, with community leaders, Rotary groups, and community groups of all types to try to promote our concept of what could happen on this piece of property that at the time was an industrial waste site and we thought could become something wonderful.
Some support came from local assemblyman Mark Alessi, who secured a sizable New York State grant for the group. But there was a catch.
He was able to get us $850,000 if we could match it.
A daunting task. Agfa was asking $1.6 million for the property, but they were required to complete the cleanup of the chemical contamination before they could sell it. Adding to the challenge, Tesla's laboratory building was quickly disintegrating.
We knew things had been deteriorating, but to see how far that had gone and how badly the roofs leaked and how crumbling the walls were and how much vandalism had occurred over the years, it was actually more than we had expected. Sadly, it really has been a terrible last 15 or so years for that site. There's also always been the concern of destruction through fire or other kinds of damage.
Miraculously, thus far, the historically significant building had survived a century of change. Additions were added to the original structure rather than breaking through it. Even the outline of the tower base was still intact. There was hope to restore this part of Tesla's legacy if the Science Center could just raise the funds. a feat Tesla found to be challenging in his time, some help came from the press.
There was an article written in the New York Times about us, which brought us some attention.
The spotlight also brought the sprawling plot of land to the attention of interested developers.
To hear about people who were coming to look at the property with their own ideas of what they might be able to use it for. And of course, that created some serious concern in our minds. We met with a couple of potential purchasers and explained to them what we had hoped to do there. There was a local real estate developer who looked at the site, willing to possibly donate a portion of it. We would be willing to do that if we had no other choice, but to save the whole 16 acres of the original site was more interesting and hopeful goal, but still seeming out of our reach.
At that moment, another hope for Wardenclyffe appeared. A group of independent filmmakers were making news for an award-winning screenplay they wrote about Nikola Tesla. Led by director Joseph Sikorski, they put their energies behind the Tesla Science Center's efforts to save Wardenclyffe.
I heard about Joe getting a film script prize, and I thought, this is Long Island, we're the Long Island Press. It makes so much sense for us to talk about Wardenclyffe and what we need to do to expose the effort to keep it. The politics of keeping Wardenclyffe from being overrun and turned into a suburban wasteland really intrigues me too. You have Tesla, you have Edison, you've got these amazing ideas and his creations right there in our backyard, and to let it just go to waste and crumble is a crime.
We met with the members of his team who were working on the Fragments from Olympus film, and Joe had created as part of his budget a $1 million line that would go towards the purchase of Wardenclyffe.
Then, in November of 2011, the filmmakers received a letter of commitment for the full funding. $3 million would be allocated for the production of the film, and $1 million would be donated to the Tesla Science Center for the purchase of Wardenclyffe. But before the closing could take place, tragedy had struck again. A sudden illness had befallen one of the investment team members. Dependent on him, the signed letter of commitment was now in limbo. After a grueling legal process, the financing was cancelled.
After these years of waiting and watching and trying to build support for our purpose, it could all slip away. And that was really a very concerning time in our existence as an organization.
The timing couldn't be worse. AGFA was just finishing up the required DEC cleanup of the contaminated tower-based grounds.
By spring of 2012, they were starting to market it. It was essentially ready for sale. And that's when we started to get really concerned, because we weren't ready to buy it. We didn't have money to do it, and we didn't know where that would come from.
By summer, the fears of the Tesla Science Center were about to be realized.
There was a potential buyer. So we had a very small window of opportunity in which to find a way to raise the money that would match the grant and that would allow us to make a serious offer on the property and try to buy it.
With time running out for Wardenclyffe, Jane put out a desperate appeal over the internet.
I put a little message on our Facebook page, and I asked if anyone knew of anybody or who knew someone, whatever connections anyone might have. Somebody said, get in touch with the Oatmeal.
The Oatmeal is web-based comic artist Matthew Inman, and his website receives between 5 and 7 million unique views a month.
I made a comic about Nikola Tesla called Why Nikola Tesla Was the Greatest Geek Who Ever Lived. I had a fundraiser that was related to, there was this silly lawsuit and this lawyer was demanding I pay some money. And instead of paying the lawyer who was threatening me with a lawsuit, I decided to raise money for cancer and for endangered grizzly bears. And I raised a lot of money with it on the internet through a crowdfunding campaign. I heard on Twitter and Reddit about this this museum that went up for sale, and a lot of people started tweeting at me saying, hey, check it out, O'Meal, maybe you should crowdfund this. So I thought, with my comic that I'd made about Tesla and a lot of Tesla fans following me, and my experience with crowdfunding, it just seemed like a perfect fit to make a difference. I created a page on Indiegogo and set the amount we wanted to raise. We added some perks if you pay a certain amount. And then I posted on my website sort of a mini comic leading to the Indiegogo campaign, sort of painting this picture of what was happening in terms of the tower being demolished, in terms of how much we needed to raise, in terms of Tesla's legacy a little bit and that kind of thing. Most people do a video where they have a video that explains, and I'm a comic artist and I prefer that medium because it lets the reader set the pace rather than a YouTube video, which I have a very short attention span. If it's an 11-minute YouTube video, I get aggravated and like, skip to the end, and then I hit the back button and nobody gets any money donated. So I decided to have a very visual comic to try and make it more engaging for readers and make them click over and actually donate.
On Wednesday evening, August 15th at 6 o'clock New York time, we went live. And as I turned on my computer and looked, we had our first contribution of $25. And in the moment that it took me to turn to my husband and say, look, we got a contribution, and look back at my computer screen, it had gone from $25 to $1,000 and kept rising throughout the night until by the time I went to bed, we were over $250,000.
When I started the campaign, I expected some interest because I had experience with it before and I've got a strong following online, but I didn't expect us to raise $27,000 an hour.
He was able to reach out to a group of people that we ourselves have had difficulty reaching because of the power of publicity that the internet has. That is in itself so remarkable and I find so gratifying.
The Tesla campaign on Indiegogo was absolutely incredible. The speed at which the funding was coming in was a record. It was actually our fastest growing campaign ever, having thousands of dollars coming in every minute for the first few days, being able to raise money from 108 countries.
Tesla really is a citizen of the world because everyone who contributed recognized his importance, no matter what country they came from. That's a very inspiring thing.
It's a bit of a story in that Tesla suffered and that Tesla was sort of this unsung hero and people wanted to help him. So there's an emotional reason to donate, there's an emotional reason to contribute, like we want to help this guy.
This was really a great way for the community who care about Tesla to stand up and say, we absolutely want to see Tesla remembered and there's no reason why this laboratory should be sold and turned into some commercial enterprise.
On the internet, people are very eager to like things, click things, and share things, but to actually open their wallet and pay for things is a much harder thing to convince them of. So to see the fact that the internet wanted to pay to repair the legacy of an inventor who's been dead for 70 years was really inspiring.
Well, the interesting thing about crowdfunding is that every successful work of art throughout history has been crowdfunded. We just have time shifted it now. What the communications allowed us to do is to have the people that are going to be the end users actually also crowdfund up top. What crowdfunding as we know it now allows you to do is just have the people that want to see that pay for it in advance.
Around 3 p.m. on August 21st, 2012, just 6 days after the crowdfunding campaign began, the Oatmeal sent out this tweet. A top-tier donation had put the Tesla Museum effort past their goal. Now the state matching grant would be released, allowing the Tesla Science Center to purchase the Wardenclyffe property. The donation had come from a familiar supporter.
Our very good friend, Joseph Sikorski, whose film Fragments from Olympus has been a motivator for all of us too, because that's been a supportive endeavor on Joe's part for all of this time.
To make the contribution, the filmmakers had spent all of their project starting funds. Also responding to the call were angel investors Greg and Meredith Talley of Colorado, who donated $35,000 to the cause, the largest donation of the campaign. In addition, a third angel investor helped elevate the final crowdfunding total. A distant relative of Nikola Tesla, Dusan Stoyanovich, provided an incentive in the final days of the crowdfunding effort. When the campaign had ended on September 29th, the final total was a staggering $1,370,461.
Really, times are changing, and now the internet is really allowing many more people to jump in much faster to support the ideas they care about, to fund the ideas, to really speak with their wallets and to catalyze change.
If you know Tesla's history, then you know that he basically spent his entire life chasing money. We have a new class of funder in the modern age. It's an amateur funder. It's just someone who's kind of interested. These are not venture capitalists. These are not people who are going to derive profit from these inventions. Now what we have is we have like just inspired sort of Tesla-like people coming together to fund inspired Tesla-like people. It's a kind of funding that has never existed in the history of invention. And so I think it's Tesla's grandchildren in some ways that have stepped forward to save Wardenclyffe, right? Who've stepped forward and said, I want to give $10 or $100 to save this kind of like temple of American ingenuity. Because that's what Wardenclyffe ultimately is. And sure, it's about wireless electrical transmission, but it's really about this faith in the human imagination that we can transcend the laws of physics and create a new world. That's really, the inspiration that Tesla has been. I think that's why so many people responded to the call to try to save this place rather than just, mow it all down and turn it into a mall.
Following hundreds of hours of pro bono work by the law firm Squire Sanders, a closing date for the property was scheduled. On May 2nd, 2013, thanks to the support of the internet community, a small local organisation once known as Friends of Science East was handed the deed to Wardenclyffe.
AGFA is going to hand Jane Alcorn, representing Friends of Science East, the deed to the property, and Jane is going to hand to Chris the payment. And please. Congratulations. Congratulations. Friends of Science East, you now own the Tesla site. Thank you.
The world community that Tesla hoped to link together through his Wardenclyffe Tower had united nearly a century after its destruction and saved his last laboratory site on the planet.
It means so much to so many people around the world.
We're so excited to start a new future on this property.
We thank everyone for their support.
Now we have a big job ahead of us to develop and make this actually happen, to have Tesla's dream come true.
Another interesting note. Tesla had also patented the logic AND gate, a fundamental digital component of every computer, which ultimately empowered over 33,000 individuals to connect with the Wardenclyffe cause. Tesla was indeed ahead of his time. The TSC board members were able to toast to their achievement in the base of Nikola Tesla's tower. But after the celebration, a huge morning hangover would arrive in the form of perk fulfillment.
All of a sudden, we were faced with figuring out how to send out 10,000 t-shirts and so on. And a lot of these people live in other countries. We had to send emails to everybody asking their t-shirt sizes. That was a headache. We had a lot of names and addresses that were simply unreadable. People were just really excited and really enthusiastic. A lot of people said, don't worry, if we tried to send it and it got shipped back, they said, I wasn't in it for the perk anyway, give it to somebody else. They were really, really amazing people. We love our contributors, we really do.
We thought of what we had accomplished, which was great, but when we thought about what we had ahead of us, that was really a bit frightening.
To restore the property and laboratory building, new challenges have arisen. The lab that still stands is in dire need of repair.
We have enormous work ahead of us, not just in the planning, but also in the fundraising and in the physical work. Even to remove buildings is expensive, and we don't have the kind of money left that will allow us to do everything that needs to be done on this site.
After decades of neglect, the surrounding grounds have become a jungle of overgrown weeds and brush. But thanks to the help of some enthusiastic volunteers, the task of reclaiming Wardenclyffe has begun.
Amazing volunteers.
We're both interested in science. We kind of like the idea of working towards something to honor somebody who sort of was slighted in history. To be here and be a part of this in saving Wardenclyffe is just like, it's a dream come true. This place is sacred to us, you know, to be able to stand here on the tower base right now gives me chills. As a kid, my parents could never get me to do yard work, but to be able to mow Tesla's lawn, it's just, how awesome is that?
From all over the world, volunteers have travelled to help with the cleanup. All generations seem to be inspired to support the effort.
As young people became acquainted with Tesla as an icon, it has been demonstrated how many people really were interested in seeing Tesla and his Wardenclyffe property being purchased and be recognized.
Indeed, Tesla and Tesla-inspired technology are finding a new audience with the next generation who have been able to fill in the historic gaps where the educational system has failed them.
All the high schoolers and middle schoolers who are taught about electricity and radio and the fundamentals of our technology don't really learn the history and the background of who created that technology. And when I asked my teacher if he knew anything about Tesla, he pointed to a poster of a car in the back of the room, which was the only way he had ever heard of the name.
No books in my library, and when I asked the librarian, she was wondering who Tesla even was, which was very unfortunate because, well, there should be more material in public resources about a man who changed the world so suddenly and greatly.
The achievements of Nikola Tesla are slowly beginning to be recognized by the mainstream of American culture. Though, historical misconceptions combined with some, perhaps overly enthusiastic supporters may create barriers to the innovator's greater acceptance.
There is a nut element to Tesla too, right? Talk about the nut element. We all know the real science stuff, right? How do you separate what is total jive about Tesla from what is real? The alternating current thing is real. The problem I have with Tesla is whenever someone's talking about him, they always cross over into nut.
There's a kind of science fiction side to, let's say, Tesla admirers.
I think the most surprising thing I learned is that people thought that Tesla is a space alien to come back from another time to help us. Because if it really was that, I don't think he would have died penniless feeding pigeons. I think he would have had a lot more power.
Another book called Nikola Tesla and the Venusian Spaceship, which said that he was still alive in 1970, floating around on UFOs and landing on this guy's backyard in Canada.
Tesla was a very creative and very well-disciplined scientist engineer, and he should get credit for that. So to start saying that he, figured out how to make battleships levitate and stuff like that is a disservice to Tesla.
And Edison did, you're pretty okay with him having the light bulb in the phonograph?
Sure, yeah, he was a great inventor. Of course, the lighting that Tesla invented was much more efficient. He invented fluorescent lighting
fluorescent bulbs,
and
40 years before industry invented it. That's
really?
One of the things, yeah.
Neon lights. When people came to Tesla's lab, they saw this strange kind of lighting, and he discovered that the electric charge...
So he really is responsible for Vegas.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because without neon, we're just a patch of stinking desert.
There you go.
That's all we are without neon.
The sensational and mysterious had always clouded the reality of the scientist's work. His experiments and claims were often treated with unqualified contempt. One area of controversy has been the existence of the Wardenclyffe tunnels Tesla described at his 1922 foreclosure hearing. Now, with access to the Wardenclyffe property, it could finally be investigated further. From drawings created from descriptions by Tesla and his manager George Scherf, 4 possible tunnels began at the bottom of the tower's 120-foot shaft, curving upward to the surface. Using ground-penetrating radar, the search began across Tesla Street at the Rocky Point Fire Department, the site of the 1979 incident described earlier. Because GPR devices have depth limitations, the strategy was to try to find the points where the tunnels may have reached the surface. Other limitations with the GPR unit may occur from factors like construction backfill, natural phenomena, or other anomalies. On the corner of the property, the sensors detected an approximately 3 by 3 foot hole about 5 feet down and descending in depth towards the center of the tower base. Following that path, there is another detection 5.5 feet below ground across Tesla Street towards the tower. Then, another detection on the same axis, this time on the Wardenclyffe grounds. A 3 by 3 hole at the depth of 10 feet below ground is located. There are no further detections towards the center of the tower base, perhaps suggesting an abrupt descent of the path, since maximum detection depth by the sensors is between 10 and 13 feet. Seemingly interested in the tunnel search was Wardenclyffe's mascot, Little Nick. But if he knew something, he wasn't talking. As suspected though, following on the axis, opposite the original southeastern detection site, another hole is found, approximately the same distance northwest from the center of the tower. It should be noted that detections by the GPR units could represent other sources like sewer lines or drainage channels, but the symmetry and alignment of the detections does support a tunnel-like cavity on a direct axis through the center of the tower base. Another vindication for Tesla more than 70 years after his death. Based on the measurements, the tunnel configuration may have appeared more like this. Due to time constraints, the search was conducted on only 2 of the tunnel spurs. Based on this investigation, it is surmised that the other 2 would be as pictured and create an axis from southwest to northeast. Also investigated on the property were 2 brick cisterns. Though it's possible these were at one time part of the tunnel network, they appear to be connected with the drainage systems of nearby buildings, since the GPR unit was unable to pick up a path from them towards the tower base. But perhaps by using more sensitive techniques, like hammer seismic, more conclusive results can be determined. But as the cleanup continues and the geography of Wardenclyffe changes, there are likely to be more discoveries. And more celebrations, like the one that happened in September of 2013.
We had the great good fortune of being able to accept a wonderful gift from the Republic of Serbia.
The gift was a statue of Nikola Tesla by one of Serbia's most famous sculptors, Nikola Jankovic. Contributors to the campaign and dignitaries were invited to the monument's unveiling. And one special dignitary also attended, the leader of the Republic of Serbia, President Tomislav Nikolic.
Thank you.
Now people can see how important this place is, not just to the average person, but internationally. It has brought international attention. And I think it's also brought a sense of pride to the community, that now there's something beautiful on a site that for so many years was hidden behind a jungle and was an industrial waste site, essentially. Yay!
We may never know what Tesla might have achieved at Wardenclyffe. It is widely accepted that the telecommunications aspect would have been not only a success, but in many ways superior to the system we have today. One example cited being its vastly improved signal-to-noise ratio. Opinions vary greatly, however, in the area of wireless power, particularly if enough could be transmitted in industrial quantities. But even if only small levels of power were transmitted, perhaps only enough to recharge the batteries of the devices we use today, the whole world would be sustained by free wireless energy from Wardenclyffe Tower. And if Tesla had been able to pursue full implementation of his world wireless system, continuing with the universal relay at Niagara Falls, the possibilities are interesting to ponder. Especially considering that even today's scientists in modernly equipped labs have been unable to duplicate many of his experiments. Electrical wonders that mesmerized the people of his time.
He came from these humble roots and actually built a tower out there, and for one brief moment, come close to fulfilling his dreams. That's an American story right there. Today, the bureaucracy, the red tape would probably sink an idea like that.
The challenge for many of us is to try to find a way that you can have those creative environments that are not encumbered by bureaucracy. I think all you can say is it's kind of an inspiration that there was all this productivity among these people at that time. It's just a reminder of how things could be.
We look at this as a place where people can be inspired to work following Tesla's path, that he was an innovator, and we love to see innovation continue at Wardenclyffe.
I think one way to look at Wardenclyffe, it's a symbol of someone trying to do something great for all the right reasons, to bring about world community.
We needed a Tesla museum in the United States. Tesla himself stated many times he considered himself to be an American. He loved America. So it doesn't make sense that there's a museum in Belgrade, but there isn't one here.
Wardenclyffe, as an element of Tesla's life and background, is an ideal place to have some sort of museum-type research facility.
Hopefully his interest in helping humanity and looking for ways to promote peace will all be realized in some ways at this site.
I see Wardenclyffe as a beacon, an education center for the world.
People spoke, really, from all over the world, saying that this place is important, this place really matters.
Wardenclyffe is a kind of cathedral. It's a monument. If Tesla's vision had to do with this wireless transmission of energy, I think we're still on that mission. We haven't gotten there yet.
Sharing with everyone, with no price. That was Tesla.
It's given people hope. Tesla's brought people together, and he's inspired them to try for their own goals, whether they're scientific or social or whatever they may be. He's been an inspiration.
It's not just that people should acknowledge what he's done to their life and how he made it better, but it's just the overall knowledge that people can do things beyond what we think.
Saving Wardenclyffe, to me, is as important a project as maintaining Mount Vernon or refurbishing, the houses on the Underground Railroad or keeping the Alamo open to the public. In other words, this is one of the great American characters, not only just who he was, but where he did it. We go to see the Underground Railroad, we go to the Alamo, we go to Mount Vernon and Monticello, we go to these places because that's how we recognize some great person and moment in history. And that's how we will recognize Nikola Tesla, is at Wardenclyffe.
By uniting the world for the common cause of preserving the past to help inspire the future, Tesla's dream, in part, is continuing at Wardenclyffe.
The scientific man does not aim at an immediate result. He does not expect that his advanced ideas will be readily taken up. His work is like that of the planter, for the future. His duty is to lay the foundation for those who are to come, and to point the way.
I've been working on a new print. It's Nikola Tesla riding a giant cat, because he liked cats. And he's got this swarm of pigeons behind him, and he's chasing Edison, who's got a light bulb stuck up his butt, and it's glowing. And the cat's eyes are illuminated, and it's chasing the light. And in the very distance, Wardenclyffe is firing into the sky like a blue light, so it's pretty awesome.
I think it's a really special time, and everybody should just maybe go find yourself.
Matthew wrote back, he said, and I met Tesla's relative, and that was cool.
Okay? I'm going to go eat now.